homework. And I will introduce Melissa to you in a few moments. But just once again, thank you for joining, and enjoy the evening. Please get ready to have some questions for the end. Melissa's very engaging and interactive and is very willing to answer questions. So I think we're going to grab the opportunity tonight to ask as many questions as we can, or just to have a conversation. It would be really, really great. So just before we start, let's just look at a few housekeeping issues that we might want to look at. Just to please mute your microphones and keep them on mute throughout the webinar, especially when Melissa is talking. I know sometimes we do forget, but it would be great if we could be muted. I've said, please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know your profession, where you're from, and then a special welcome to numerous international participants. And I see Lauren is on the webinar. Lauren is from the US originally. I don't know if she is right there at the moment, but thank you, Lauren, for joining in, because if I had to think, it's probably sort of way behind on your time today. And then, if possible, cameras on. We encourage them just to help us feel connected, but understand if it's not possible. And then we said, should you have any questions or insights during the presentation, please put them in the chat, and we will address them during the Q&A or reflection time after the presentations. And we will also just share a few websites and as we go along, if you're looking for those. And then again, it's this webinar will be around about an hour with time for questions. So self-care is important. Move, stretch, take deep breaths. It is the evening. Some of you might have had very long days, and make yourself a cup of tea or coffee. And then when we do have these sort of webinars, there might be times where we will share cases or experiences, and we just ask that you respect privacy if there is anything personal shared with the group. And then I've still got, please complete the online survey, but we are not going to be doing one tonight, as this is part of the comprehensive course. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Melissa Williams Platt to you. What a beautiful picture. Melissa, you always look so stunning. And I just want to say a little bit about Sam. I'm not going to go into all her educational credentials tonight. Melissa is a professional, but first and foremost, Melissa is Sam's mum. And Sam's mum's story deeply informs her life's purpose. She is a speaker and a coach. She offers talks, training and workshops, healthcare consulting, palliative care support, integral coaching, and specialized debriefing grief counseling for families, teams, and individuals in both corporate and healthcare settings. And Melissa is the co-founder of Footprints for Sam, and I'm sure she's going to share a little bit of her reason for founding Footprints for Sam as she tells the story of Sam tonight. And one thing about Melissa, outside of her work, she loves spending time with the other love of her life, Fred, and they both have a passion for running and spending time with their dogs on their farm. And how I know this is because over the years, I'm also a runner, and I follow them very closely on Strava and all the interactions, and as part of all their activities that they do for the communities and their fundraising. So that is part of their lifestyle, but also to know that they're a beautiful family outside of just the work they do. And Melissa, we're very honored to welcome you this evening. As I said, Melissa has got a lot of credentials behind her. I know she's got a BA from UCT in industrial psychology and French, and she did the postgrad diploma in children's palliative care. And I'm very privileged to say that I had the privilege of to do that postgrad diploma with Melissa in that year, and we walked side by side that whole year through her journey. And she really took on a lot that year. I mean, it was 6 months after the passing of Sam, and she embraced the course. And I think that sort of set a foundation for her journey in children's palliative care and where she is today. And so, Melissa, I'm going to say over to you, and we're looking forward to hearing from you this evening and sharing what you do have to do. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Trace, and thanks for that introduction. Can everybody hear me? I'm at our apartment in Cape Town today, so out of my normal setting. So, Trace, just thumbs up. Can you hear?
Yes, can hear
Okay,
you. I'm going to stop
fantastic.
sharing and handing over to you, Melissa.
Okay, brilliant. So just welcome everybody into the space tonight. And I'm definitely one of those people that shouldn't be let out of the room after 5 in the evening. It's a bit like drunken driving. So I hope I make some sense this evening. I'm definitely more of a morning person. Um, but as always, Tracy and Sue, how does one say no to them? So really just wonderful to be with all of you tonight. I don't want it to be death by PowerPoint. So please, you're even welcome to interrupt me mid talk. I'm sure Tracy and Sue can keep an eye on any hands that go up because I might say something that triggers or that you really think I want to ask this burning question. And so feel free to reach out if you'd like to. And Tracy, I remember Tracy and I were talking earlier with Sue. We actually studied our postgrad in palliative medicine. We had a group study session in this flat where I'm presenting from all those years ago in 2017. And I studied 6 months after Sam died, which many would have said was mad. But for me, had this burning desire in my heart, which I hope will come through this evening, in terms of how do we change medicine? How do we fundamentally shift the way medicine is taught, the way medicine is felt, and the way medicine is experienced? And for yourselves as health professionals, how to engender that remembering that first and foremost, you are human beings. And tonight, the focus as I talk will be hopefully you'll see a lot of the golden threads coming through in terms of how key communication is and how key teamwork is. Because without those two factors, you cannot be a health professional. And I often say when health professionals ask me, you know, what was it that really would have made a difference in your journey? And fundamentally, those two factors, if I had just been spoken to, if I had just been heard, if there had just been a team caring for Sam holistically, I fundamentally believe that he would still be alive today. And those key things in the missing were detrimental to the outcomes that we experienced, as well as the entire journey itself. We spent 15 and a half months in hospital with Sam. He never came home. So I'm going to take this moment to introduce you to Sam. You can see some pictures there. Sue, I sent you a slide that maybe you could show right at the end with some more pictures, including some of Fred. But you can see Sam there, a little beautiful little boy who was just our little miracle. And everyone used to say, don't look into Sam's eyes because you'll never leave the room. And, for 13 and a half months, you can see in that second picture there, he was literally tied to his bed with his ET tube. And looking back with more information and more experience, I recognize now how painful it was for him. Perhaps not something I was entirely aware of at the time, and that just always breaks my heart. But when he was finally released and had his tracheostomy, but very sadly only at 14 months, he was able to be a little boy for the last 2.5 months of his life. But I'm really touched to be able to share some of his journey and our experience as I work through some of my thoughts this evening. So let's see. There we go. So this is a poem that I want to share because I'm sure that often you wonder, what is it like to lose a child? And this is something I wrote at Red Cross Children's Hospital where Sam died the first couple of days when we started our course, our postgraduate course. So it says here 1 year without you. At the time it was 6 months, but I kind of moved that title. Now it's over 8 years. But the first time I actually read this poem in public was at a critical care conference, which was the first time I presented Sam's story to a group of health professionals, other than those that I'd studied with. So 8 years without you. It is just one of those things, the spoken word that leaves your mouth and the unsaid that scorches your heart. Because what you're really truly saying is, it is the one thing that shatters your soul, that makes you want to scream and that tears you apart, that no parent should ever have to endure, and that you will never ever understand, that you will always question, and that shakes your faith to its very core, that destroys your equilibrium and keeps you up at night, that drains your tears and strips you bare, and that saps your husband before your very eyes, that takes the perfect three of you to just two, and that fills the eyes of all those you love with reflected pain, that gnaws away at you each second of every day, and that truly changes a family forever. The death of your precious child is that one very thing that should not ever be just one of those things. And the reason I wrote this poem was because, and this is, the start of communication, is you would literally just say it's just one of those things to make people feel okay. Because how often, people will say, just as a conversation starter when they don't know you, and do you have children? And I always know that if I say truthfully, yes, I do, but he's dead, it's a conversation that people just don't know how to have. And I think that's the saddest thing when you look at the world today, we just are not able to have often these real and authentic conversations. And I think this course is so key that you're being offered through Patch, and so many of you are brave enough to do, because as a mum who had a neonate, who had a preterm child, Sam was just 28, 29 weeks when he was born. There was never ever a conversation about, what would things look like if they went wrong? And I'll share just a short anecdote with you. I remember then when we were touring the private hospital where, Sam was going to be born. And this was before our last trip to Cape Town when things had gone horribly wrong. And they basically whizzed us around the hospital and said, that's the NICU over there, but you don't have to worry about that. Well, we did have to worry about that. That's where we ended up. And there was never any guidance or kind of preparation for what that journey would look like, because everybody prepares you for the happy journey. And I remember after Sam died, we put a whole parental guide together. I'll show you a picture of it later. And I was so proud of it. And we did it together with one of the private hospitals, and they sponsored and we distributed to all of their hospitals. And it was wonderful to have in some of the neonatal units. But I took it to a gynae as well. And I said to her, have these in your waiting room or have them available for mums. And as I left, I saw her surreptitiously putting them in a drawer. And I said, why are you putting those in a drawer? And she said, no, I don't want to scare the mom, or, we only want the happy side of things. And I just thought, as a mum, I would have loved to have that parental guide in a neonatal bag that I was receiving, or a maternity kit, because you want to be prepared for all eventualities. It's not cursing your prospective birth. It's just preparing you for something if things aren't as perfect as you hope them to be. So as I talk, I want you to think of Sam, and I want you to perhaps take off your academic hats and health professional titles, and I want you to think about being a mom, being a sibling, perhaps being a daughter, a sister, a brother, an uncle, whatever it is, because we have many roles in life. We are human beings within a community. And if Sam was here, he would say, I am Sam, a beloved child, a beloved son, a beloved grandchild, a beloved cousin, a beloved person, a beloved creation of God. But most importantly, I am viable for life. And I say that sentence because we very sadly found out after Sam passed away was that right in the beginning, it had been written on his file, not viable for life. And I often think about the power of those words and the power of that statement over perhaps what that care then looked like going forward, because he was viable for life. He proved that he was for at least 15 and a half months. And as I said earlier, had things been done differently, I really believe that he might well be sitting next to me this evening, listening to some of the words. And I know that he is still listening, and really grateful for the change that we've been able to make because of his life and his journey, and also his suffering. Sam would also say, I'm not just a chest. I'm not just a set of lungs, a pincushion, an experiment, a rare disease, a time waster. One doctor said to us, do you know that because of Sam, people have left my waiting room? And I remember at the time, it's still, I can hear those words so strongly. You know, Sam was that day in a critical situation. They didn't know what was going on. His SATs just kept plummeting and nobody could get to the bottom of it. And the doctor had to spend a little bit more time with our son. And he said that people were leaving his waiting room. And I wasn't sure if I was actually meant to answer his question because it was just so ridiculous at the time. Sam would say, I am not just not viable for life. And as you think of all the roles that you play, other than that of the health professional, I want you to think about the conversations that you have with family members, the conversations that you have with patients, and think about how those words have a ripple and an impact. How do they touch those family members? How are they heard? What is the wake that you leave behind you when you leave a room? Is it kind or is it unkind? Or is it somewhere in between? That is so much part of the journey. What is felt by the words that land, the impact of those conversations, because families are terrified. A hospital is a place where you feel comfortable because it's one you've chosen to be in. But most families are there in crisis. They're not familiar. So your words matter. Your presence matters. Your humanity matters. What I really would love to give you in this talk is a kind of quality of life. We use those words, sometimes we throw them away. And what does it mean from a parent's perspective? What does it mean from Sam's perspective? Truly seeing through the eyes of a child and a parent. So Samuel John Frederick Platt, a very long name for a little boy. And I still remember the day that Fred arrived, my husband, and said, we have to fill in a form and we have to give Sam a name. And remembering that he came really, really prim. And I always knew he was Samuel. I don't know why. I just knew that was his name. I even had I think it was a cockatiel when I was about 8 or 10. And that little cockatiel was called Sam too. So it was a name that was always close to my heart. Everything I loved, I called Sam. And Sam was just the most incredible child. He was born on the 9th of April, 2015, and by emergency Caesar. And I remember communication breaking down, even kind of, if I look at it, there were 3 stages or many, but right in the beginning, I felt as a pregnant mom for the first time, an older mom, that something was fundamentally wrong. And yet, when I spoke to my gynae, he just said to me, oh, you're just a nervous mom. You can come for as many scans as you want. Everything's fine. But I just had this niggling feeling. And my gut sense was saying something is just not lacquer. And it just never was really heard, just dismissed, a mum who was just kind of over concerned, over worried. And I think my guidance always to health professionals is listen to a mother's instinct. If she says something is wrong, it probably is, even if the bloods are saying nothing. I remember always calling it when Sam was sick and the bloods would show up about 4 days later. So it's really, really key. Listen to your patient's family, listen to the child if they're able to speak. That communication, remember that communication is only kind of 20% verbal. Watch their body language, listen to your instincts, get in touch with your senses, listen on all levels because it's so key. And I remember then with the gynae not listening, and then we had our last hurrah. We went to Cape Town just before Sam was born. And I remember saying to Fred, something's really wrong. And he said to me, I'm sure it's just the spaghetti bolognese you ate. And I said, no, this is definitely more than indigestion. And he took me to the hospital and I had Braxton Hicks. And they said, please just like stay for a few days, stay overnight. We were there for my birthday. We were there for Two Oceans. And Fred said, well, what do I do? Do I run? What do I do? And I said, well, we're not going anywhere. Go run. And we'll be here when you get back. And then that was the first time that they picked up swelling over Sam's brain, over his head. And that then, when they sent us back to Joburg and finally did another scan, had then increased and gone over to his abdomen, and they just didn't know what it was. And I remember when we went back to Johannesburg, and I said to Fred, I'm really not feeling great after the flight. And we went straight into the hospital, and the nurse there said to, I remember her phoning someone and saying, I'm not sure why this mother's here, nothing's wrong. And I could hear her. And I remember doubting myself, but just trusting that I knew something was wrong and Sam was counting on me. And the next morning, the doctors came in and there were red stamps all over the file, red stickers. And the same nurse apologized and just said, you're having to have this boy today. And I remember saying to Fred, I phoned him, he was in meetings, and I just said, you're going to meet your son today. So communication. I could have been the mom that went, well, she knows better, and left. And Sam would have died. I never would have got to meet him. So these are things to remember. Listen to the families. Listen to your own gut sense, because we forget that. We live in our heads and we forget our instincts. And that so often can save lives. And that's part of communication. So I never really know. It was somewhere between 28, 29, 30 weeks that he was born. And when people look at his weight, they go, that's quite a healthy weight. Most of that was just swelling and water. So in the beginning, Sam looked a bit strange. It looked a bit like a sharky head. And eventually that settled when the swelling came down. They thought it was transient tyrosinemia. We never really knew if it was or wasn't. But as I say, things were just not quite right from the beginning. We spent 13 and a half months in the NICU. And for the first 3 months, he was on a ventilator, and it was very difficult to even hold him. In fact, I waited 3 months to hold him. And that again, with the work that I now do in state for the last few years, we work a lot with kangaroo mother care. And I just think that was the journey I never got to have. When we studied at UCT at Red Cross, one of the incredible nurses that many of you might know, Sister Jane Booth, called me in and said, come, Melissa, come have a look at this. And there was a little 2-month-old with a trachea on his mum's breast. That was the journey that we could have had there been teamwork, had there been communication, had there been conversation. But there was such a hierarchy in the hospital that we were in that the nurses were terrified to even be able to give their opinion or to be heard and seen. I certainly never felt seen or heard. Sam, I lost how many transfusions he had. I lost count. His x-rays, including MRIs, were close to 100 by the time he died, at least 6 anesthetics, and a good couple of botched operations. One in particular, I remember, he was going in for an operation to have a muscle biopsy. And one of the doctors said to me again, communication, Melissa, I really think Sam needs a port. And I said, what is a port? And he whipped out a photo of a young lady in a wedding gown, and just underneath her collarbone was this little bump. And he said, that's the port. Sam really needs one. And I still didn't know what the heck I was signing for. And I signed for this port, which was life-saving and giving in certain circumstances. But ultimately, Sam died from sepsis in his port. As a parent, the guilt that I felt because of that just is something I still think of. And yet a port is something that is so important in certain situations. You think of somebody with cancer and cancer treatment and how it can really help a patient instead of that pain and trauma to have that access. But at the same time, one needs to know as a parent what you're dealing with. What are the risks? What are the benefits? So that you're making an informed choice and an informed decision. Communication, teamwork, being part of those decisions requires one to be informed, and not in a way that you feel stupid. Sit down, have conversations with families. I often think that, when you're meeting with families and parents, you might not speak the same language. You might be of different social strata, different intellect levels, and yet you're all human beings, and you don't know who that person is. They might be a chief, a leader, a wise elder, whoever they are. We always need to trust one another as human beings and sit down and have real conversations. Never ever speak down to somebody. I often felt spoken down to because I didn't have doctor behind my title. And yet I was a successful business person. I was successful in my own right, and so was my husband. And yet we were spoken to as if we knew nothing, as if we had no opinions that mattered. It was absolutely heartbreaking, and it impacted Sam's journey and ours in detrimental ways. In January 2016, Sam went in for a Mickey op, which was meant to be a routine procedure. Again, we didn't really understand what or why it was needed. And I remember at the time, one of the nurses saying to me, Sam is stable. I don't think he should be having this operation. But we'd been told that that's what he had to do. And Sam, my mum and I had literally been downstairs for 5 minutes having a cup of coffee, and we were called back in. And I thought, gee, I remember thinking that was really quick. I barely got downstairs. And we got upstairs. Sam was coming out of the anesthetic, and this is a little boy who was later diagnosed with central cord disease. So that little movement I felt in utero continued into life. And there he was, determinedly with his hand, literally like this against his tummy. And I said, something's wrong. And the nurse, who was one of the most amazing nurses who cared for Sam for many months, phoned the doctor and said, Melissa says something's wrong. I trust her, something's wrong. And she phoned him 3 times and he said, everything's fine, just feed him. And this led to us nearly losing Sam that night because the Mickey wasn't in his stomach. It was in his peritoneum cavity. It was a complete disaster, as you can imagine. Sam went into septic shock and we nearly lost him that evening. Had the doctor taken that moment, or surgeon, to just come back in, do a quick check, it's not difficult to check. And I think those kind of checks need to be done even with these very regular operations that are low risk, because they can be high risk when rushed. I think it's important at this juncture to also mention that it wasn't all bad. There was an incredible team of allied professionals, amazing nurses, some great doctors, yet lots of young doctors who saw us and who spoke to us. But hierarchies and lack of communication, a lack of teamwork, that toxic healthcare environment is not only detrimental to the well-being of the patients, but also detrimental to the health professionals within those wards. Because if there isn't teamwork, if there isn't trust, if there isn't psychological safety, it means that patients are unheard, families are unseen, teams and staff are unseen, and this is from all levels. And it negatively impacts everybody along that care journey. So despite the loving nurses and amazing physiotherapists that we had, there was still this underlying tension and angst that I had to witness every single day from Sam's bedside. And I believe that he could feel that tension. He could feel that angst because so many of the nurses would say, Sam shouldn't be on a ventilator. He had this flippin' ventilator that used to scream, and they would bring the technician in time and time again to come and fix it. And he used to say, this child shouldn't be ventilated. But never was there a discussion about what the alternatives were. Sam needed a trachea. And when we finally asked about a trachea after a nurse had told us about it and told us about Sister Jane Booth in Cape Town and her trachea program, they said to us that Sam would die. It was not the way to go with him. When we finally got a second opinion, they said Sam was the perfect candidate. But really, it was just too late. But finally, we got to move, and it really felt like we were escaping jail. And that was the first time in 13 and a half months that Sam got to go outside. And I remember the doctor saying to us, she was the emergency doctor who was taking us on the flight. And she said, either you can take Sam into the airplane or I can. But if you carry him, I'll just have the oxygen behind you and the ventilator and everything else, all the paraphernalia. And we carried him in. And I will never forget, because you can see that picture of the children in the sun. I could feel the sun on my back, which meant for the first time, Sam got to feel the sun on his face. And that often breaks my heart every time I think of it, but also soothes it that he got to feel the sun at least once. When we arrived in Cape Town, and this is not a Cape Town versus Joburg thing because there are many amazing teams in Joburg, it was just our journey. For the first time, and this was again a private facility, the contrast was huge. There was a family and child-centric focus. There was a true culture of excellence with true inspirational individuals who were focused on collaborative care. We arrived on the Monday, and literally immediately the lead doctor set up a WhatsApp group, got us all together, had conversations, looked at Sam's care plan, said, why is he being fed at 10 o'clock at night? You need to look at this. You need to be able to feed him so that when you go home, there's a routine. And I'll never forget just bursting into tears. And she said, what's wrong? You've just arrived and you're already in tears. I said, because, well, it's a lot. But you saying home, we were told not to say the word home because it led to false hope. Words. We needed hope. And I think if I could get hold of those medical textbooks that say false hope, don't give parents false hope. My husband will also tell you there is no such thing, even if the hope is a beautiful death. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but our language is so key, and those conversations are so key. Parents need to be part of the journey. So Sam arrived in Cape Town on the Monday. There was a plan already in place. He went straight into theatre the next day. He was literally off, or actually arrived on the Monday, off oxygen by the Tuesday, operation on the Wednesday. It was all happening so quickly. For 13 and a half months, it felt like we just stood still. And Sam was just there getting repeated nosocomial infections. Suddenly there was a plan. Suddenly we were part of a community that cared, and they cared about us and really cared about us as his parents who had a voice. It was dramatic in the contrast. And it was amazing in that up, I'll never forget, because of the whole peritonitis episode, the doctor was aware how terrified I was every time Sam had to go under the knife again. And she sent us photos. She came out mid-op to tell us because it was running a bit longer than expected. Those are the things. We just need to communicate. That can take off so much angst out of that journey. You can imagine as a parent sitting for 2 hours in a waiting room waiting for your child. Every procedure is absolutely devastating and heartbreaking and anxiety driving. But as health professionals, one can lessen that impact simply through communication, collaboration, teamwork, conversation. All of those things make these journeys a little bit easier, especially one with a child who is premature or who's facing a chronic journey. It's really, really hard for parents. And then finally, after 14 months, we got a diagnosis of central core disease. And I often think that, sometimes when we think about the definition of pediatric palliative medicine, and people always say it's from diagnosis, I always say it should be from recognition of a chronic condition, something that is unknown, something that is that little bit more serious, because that's when you need a team. And that talk that I did 3 months after Sam died, that's what I was saying. Medicine needs to be a team sport. It can't be one that takes place in silos, because when there's not communication, things are missed. We need to care for patients' mind, body, and soul, and that requires communication. It requires interdisciplinary discussions, multidisciplinary. There has to be that collaboration on all levels. Sam's journey then included a team with neuro, with dietitians, one-on-one nursing for the first time. All of these things happened. I remember I'd walk into a room and there was Sam on the floor, suddenly learning to roll over to speak. The first time I heard his voice and saw his face after that trachea up was, I can still remember how warm I just felt that my child could taste food, could move his tongue, and sounded like he was saying A-E-I-O-U. I must dig out that video again and share with everybody. It was just the most beautiful, beautiful experience. And then literally 2 weeks from us coming home, there was a sudden onset of sepsis. And because Sam was a child that had been in hospital for so long, no child should be in an ICU setting for over 15 months. It was a death sentence. There was nothing left to give him. He'd been on every antibiotic known to man. And I remember that, at the time I had to sign for the only antibiotic that might help at that point. And I remember when we were studying palliative medicine at UCT, and one of the doctors saying rather flippantly, not realizing that I overheard him, that's like putting drain cleaner down your child. And, I think it's key to remember that words matter. And I've said this a few times now, but words stick. Everything you say to a family and a parent will be remembered. So remember to choose your words carefully. Put yourself in that family's shoes. How would you like to be spoken to? And when you're frenetic and you're busy and it's absolutely overwhelming, just take a moment. It literally takes a second to regroup, to ground, so that you can be present in that conversation. Because when you're not present, that's when things vital are missed. So we were told that Sam would need to be moved because of what happened with the peritonitis. He needed dialysis, and it was the only thing left to try and save his life. But unfortunately, it was too little too late. And because of the peritonitis, they could not do dialysis. There was too much scarring. I remember when we arrived at Red Cross Children's Hospital, there was this huge moon with this beautiful ring around it. I'd never ever witnessed one before. It was called a moonbow. And a moonbow is just the most miraculous thing to witness. And my husband and I thought, this is a sign. Sam's going to be fine. But unfortunately, he wasn't. And a few days later, Sam died. And it's hard to believe this year Sam would have been 10 years old. And for me, I don't know what it is about 10, but I have felt like my heart is just broken open every day this year. It's been a horrible, horribly hard year. Beautiful in so many ways, but revolting in so many others. It's almost like I've really felt the grief for the first time. And often parents will say to me, when does it stop hurting? And I think this is something that everyone who's lost someone you love, grief is forever. And some days it feels worse than others. Like for me, this year has just been revolting. And some days it feels more distant. But the grief of a child is complex because it's everything that you've lost, not just from the past, but also into the future. All of your hopes and dreams, all of their experiences, all of the first things that they never got to do. Our firsts were complex. They were his first collapse, his first resus, his first blood transfusion. These are the things that no parent should ever have to endure, but sadly, so many have to. And through our journey, witnessing both public and private, we recognize how important it is to collaborate. Again, communicate, be part of a team, learn from one another, be on those WhatsApp groups where you're discussing and having conversations. Yes, confidentiality is key, but believe me, as a parent, I'd rather you were speaking to other experts when you don't know, because not one person knows everything. So Sam's legacy, and I'm just mindful of the time, is really about recognizing early intervention and appropriate care, helping parents to have those conversations and understand and recognize the symptoms of sepsis, raising awareness about superbugs and what they are, really advocating for the patient and the parent, and for yourself when you've got something to say, it has to be heard, and giving a child a voice because they all have a right to life, no matter how short that is, and a life that is quality and one filled with excellence and care. Tracy mentioned our Footprints for Sam Trust. Love you all to like it, like our Instagram, like our Facebook. It's footprintsforsam.org or at Footprints for Sam. Love you to be part of our community, part of the Footprints for Sam family, because as part of our family, you're committing to the Samuel generation of healthcare. And our values are about humanity, about kindness, about compassion, teamwork. The words are endless. It's just to see the ripple of the trust, of the talks that I do. When I hear a doctor or a head of a department saying to me, Melissa, I heard your talk 3, 4, 5 years ago, whatever it was, and it fundamentally changed the way I do medicine. If tonight just one or two things I've said have touched your heart to change the way you speak to your patients, the way you collaborate with your patients, that's something that is so key, because that builds Sam's legacy, and those ripple effects will change lives forever. Because we really want to shift pediatric healthcare back to being, centered around medical students who listen, who hear, who sit down, who have conversations, who feel, who cry. And I want to encourage all of you. So many health professionals have said to me, it's unprofessional, I'm not allowed to cry. And I'm like, go ahead and cry. Obviously we don't want you falling kind of on the floor in a heap, but be human, be present, be someone that your patient can relate to. This is the parent guide that we put together. If anyone's interested in a copy, I can always get those to you. But it really would have helped
Our
us to
course,
have.
Melissa.
Sorry?
They can download it in our course.
Okay, brilliant. So these are things that there are resources out there. Don't try and do the business of chronic care alone. It's palliative medicine is a team sport, as I said earlier. Never ever forget that. So I'm going to skip through some of these, but just to quickly say, it, from our experience, when we talk about quality of life, it's to be loved, it's to feel safe, it's to be special, and it's to be pain-free. But most importantly, whatever you think quality of life is, don't put that on your patient or their family. Ask the question, what's important to you? What do you need? What's important to you? Remember, it's not about us. It's about the patient. And if someone had just bothered to ask me what was important for me and Sam, I might have said, don't change his nappy. It's the only thing I get to do. And that just, makes my day. Or please don't bath him until I get there, because that's something that just, something I can do to care for him. So it's those little things that brings quality of life to families. Don't assume. Ask what's important. And then as nurses, as doctors, as health professionals, as allied professionals, remember that you have a right to love the patient. You have a right to be cared for. That's a circle that sometimes we take out caring to protect ourselves. But all the research shows that health professionals need to lean in, need to feel, because if you suppress the pain, you also suppress the joy. So it's not only respecting your patients' lives, but it's respecting your own, so that you can continue the work you do, because the cost of caring can be detrimental to you, your well-being, your emotional well-being, your safety, and that of your patients. And in terms of the patient, they have a right to qualified professionals. They have a right. I wish everybody had the right to one-on-one nursing. It doesn't happen. But, that's something we would love to see one day. With the nursing crisis, I think that's going to take a very long time. Hygiene, buildings, hospital buildings are sick buildings. But we need to tell people about that so that they understand the environment that they're in when they're in a hospital. We need to communicate as multidisciplinary teams. And we need to know when to hand over the baton. And there needs to be regular feedback to parents, and very key, mutual respect. And each one of us is unique. Each patient is an individual, and everyone has the right to have a dream, to go home. So Sam would say to all of you, for I am me, let my footprints count. I just want to run through just some key lessons, because I wanted to finish at 1:45. So I'll just quickly go through these and then open the floor up to some conversation. So really the key lessons that I just want to highlight is treat the whole child, not just the symptoms. Sam says, I am Sam. I'm not just the sum total of my symptoms. I am Sam. We are human. A child is a person, a human first and foremost, and so are you. Always offer hope and always respect the child and family's dignity. Family support is key, because chronic illness impacts the whole family. You can imagine with a neonate, a baby coming early, how does that impact the family? How afraid are they? What are the questions they need to have answered? How are they coping? Are they supported? Who is their support system? Who's supporting them at home? Are they empowered to have a voice? And is that voice being heard? Excellence of care, as a doctor and a health professional, work as a team. You've got to remember that. It's human to err, and you can be wrong. And there's nothing wrong with being wrong. Really, that mindset needs to shift. Because I often say, if they just said to us, we don't know, we would have had so much more respect for them. And you are allowed to say you're sorry. Doesn't mean that you're admitting to guilt. It's just saying that we see your pain and we're so sad for what you're having to go through. Remember that it's a relay of excellence. Hand over the baton. You can't do everything yourself. Allow for second opinions. And then most importantly, remember, it's not about you. Always do the best for the child and family. Empathetic, kind healthcare is what will make South African healthcare great again, because egos do not mix well with healthcare. And then remember, questions are just questions. I used to ask questions and be shouted at. They're just questions. And then remember, a child might, out kind of exceed all expectations. You might witness some restrictions and realize that actually, despite their restrictions, they can still live the most beautiful life. And then, if possible, how can you get a child outside? How can they transition home safely, even if it is to die? And then recognize that pediatric palliative medicine needs to start as soon as possible when there is something complex at play, because teamwork, a holistic approach to a child's care, means better patient outcomes. And I know for sure, had we had a team around us right from the beginning, our journey would have been far less hard, far less heartbreaking, and I wouldn't have felt so alone, so unheard, and so unseen. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I really look forward to your questions. Thank you, Trace.
Thank you for Melissa. Oh, wow. I think that story, each time I hear you share it and tell it, it sort of hits home again. And I think we need that constant reminder all the time that we are a team and that we need to communicate. So thank you. And I'm just really hope and encourage everybody to share, ask a question. Let's have a bit of a conversation now. Please put your hands up if anyone wants to. Yes, Sue.
Have you got that lovely PDF I sent you?
Okay, I'm going to try and get it up. Just bear with me because I couldn't get it onto my PowerPoint. Hold on. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Or are you seeing other things as well?
We're seeing it now.
Hold on. Sorry, I've taken it off now.
We can see it.
Can still see it. There's just a frame around it, but I just wanted to show everybody so you could meet Fred and see Sam as well.
Lovely one.
Memories.
Yeah. He was very cheeky. I just want to encourage you, really, ask the hard questions. We actually been very privileged to, part of our story is part of the Wits GEMP program now, and it's really about how do we have these authentic conversations, these real conversations, and ask the hard questions, because we need to be able to do that, to do the work that we do.
Any questions, comments? Oh, sorry, wrong one. I do have a question, Melissa.
Sure.
It was put to me, and I think if you listen carefully, it is is about communication. It was from a doula who had an experience of being in a labor ward with a family, and she had asked the question, when a family refuses that you participate in their care because of their religion, and she wasn't sure how you respond to that. How should she personally and emotionally accept that that sort of decision that they didn't want her around, whether she had been asked. So I don't know if you've got sort of any pearls of wisdom on to share on that sort of community, because we need to respect in South Africa that yes, we need to be culturally sensitive and at the same time culturally competent. So
Absolutely. So I think firstly, I'm really saddened to hear that anyone should ever be put in that situation as a health professional. And it's a tough one, because somebody not wanting you to be involved in the care that you've been professionally trained for must feel like a punch in your gut. And I think so almost one has to look at it, now I'm putting on my professional coaching hat, is one has to look at it, how do you respond yourself to that situation? Because it must drive your anxiety right through the roof, and be really offensive. So my sense there would be to, how would one learn to ground in that situation and not want to punch the person in the face, because that must be quite tempting. But don't do that. But one would have to learn to really ground yourself in the moment and respectfully then offer the assistance of somebody else to take over from you. Because as hard as it is in that situation, it can't be about you. It can't be about us. It has to then be about the baby that's coming, and then putting somebody else in a position that they would then be able to work with. That said, it's an extremely hard situation, and I would really encourage this person to make sure that they then are also debriefed and have a conversation with somebody they trust about how that impacts them, because that is so key, because it would be so offensive. And I think that's a big thing for me, is debriefing in healthcare is key, because there are so many shocking things that one has to witness and experience, and that can't be left to compound over time. It's a terrible image, but it's like being constipated. You have to get it out. You have to have those conversations, because trauma is physical and the work you do is traumatic. And then having that cultural bias on top of that is not okay. Cultural, religious, whatever it is, it's, witnessing racism, any kind of bigotry, anything in those situations adds to the complexity of care. And I always say to the leaders that I coach that we cannot lead others until we can lead ourselves. And those kind of situations should never happen. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in, they do. So I really want to encourage all of you to think about, how would you respond in those environments? How would you react? And there's the most beautiful saying. It's from a psychiatrist who just says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our freedom to choose our response. And in that choice lies our growth and our freedom. And that's really powerful, is how would we be in those situations? Because you need to protect yourself, and you need to protect your patient, and you need to debrief thereafter, because it is a situation that is unkind.